I have up on the screen. Sorry, I have up on the screen the full drawing from last time of the 6 days of creation, and I'm going to come back to it as we get into day 3 today in particular. But as you see in the top of the sketch, day 1 is light and dark, and of course we had a little bit of water there too. Day 2, the water separated from the water, so you have the sky above and the water below. I think we also mentioned that in Scripture there are 3 heavens described. The first heaven is where the birds fly. The second is where the sun, moon, and stars are. And the third heaven is where God has his throne. And then on day 3, which we're getting into right now, the Lord brings the land out of the water, separates land from sea. And then on the land, he has tree. You'll see the 2 perfect different kinds of trees drawn there behind me. And although I don't have a palm tree there or bamboo, but the true basic kinds of trees. And then grass and stones. I want to mention the stones, and I have a reason for doing that. But, stuff that's on land. How does America put it in Horse with No Name? Plants and birds and rocks and things. I don't know if you know that song, but that's in the early 70s. There was a group called America. Never mind. Anyway, you can Google it later. And then I'm not going to get into the last 3 days yet. Let's just get right to day 3. Verse 9 of Genesis 1. And God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear." And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. So the word for land in Hebrew is eretz. And I think that haaretz, or the land, is the name of a newspaper today in Israel, the land. So you can read a newspaper and it'll say haaretz on the cover. And sea is yomim, yamim. Yomim would be days. Yamim is seas. But here you have something from, I actually don't know if this is I don't think that it's Hawaii. I think that it's where they filmed The Lord of the Rings, which is on the other side of Australia. What am I thinking? New Guinea. Yeah. Although it could be another island ring somewhere, but I actually think it's New Guinea, or something around that area. It's a little bit closer to the beautiful eastern countries than it is to Hawaii. So it's closer to your India, Southeast Asia, China, Japan area, but beautiful, beautiful, beautiful region. But it nicely shows land and sea. That's why I chose the slide, is for that reason. Then God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it according to their various kinds." And it was so. Some of these verses, they're kind of a mouthful to read out loud, but there's a reason for that. God wants us to understand that these things had seeds. God was allowing this to become self-perpetuating as time went on. So it wasn't just like they were perennials, not annuals, as we would say planting things today. An annual is a plant you plant every single year, put your tulip bulbs in or whatever it is, and the perennials are the things that are growing all the time. I have no idea what perennial my wife put in the middle of our garden, but wow, were those things thick and tall, and I don't know if they were sunflowers or what, but they were, because they didn't bloom last year, and so we just had these really tall sticks, and I ended up mowing over them, but I think they're going to come back this year. So they were perennials, and maybe we'll get enough sun that they'll bloom this year. I don't know.
But they were white?
They were just tall stalks. I don't know what the... well, they were kind of brown when I mowed them down, but they were green. But anyway, I don't know. We'll see. Anyway.
I may have to drive by your house.
You'll have to drive the alley because they're behind the big pine tree at my house. So, yeah. So, the land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with their seed in it according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. So with most fruit that's borne by trees, if I'm correct, this is certainly true of apples. If you see an apple blossom, most apple blossoms have 5 petals. Those petals are what fold up inside the apple and become the seeds. So that's when you cut the apple open, those seeds you see in there, those were the apple blossoms that were originally there. Or they were produced, or they help in their production, however it goes. And it's just an interesting example of how this works. And of course, when God was first making everything, there weren't 1,000 kinds of apples. Not even the divine Granny Smith apple was created yet. They were all just the same, whatever they were. Maybe just Red Delicious. I don't know what they would have been, or Brayburn or whatever. But when I was a missionary, all you could buy was Brayburn. When I was in that part of Washington State, and they actually got a little bit upset with you if you asked for anything else. So no, we only have. So now I buy them here, and they're the cheaper apples on our shelves, and I still like them a lot. So, all right, third day of creation. Let's go into some other things about this. So this is from Isaiah. He who created the heavens, he is God. He who fashioned and made the earth, he founded it. He did not create it to be empty, but formed it to be inhabited, he says. I am the Lord, and there is no other. The same is true of the human heart. He did not create the human heart to be empty and devoid of faith. He created it to be filled and formed it to be inhabited by whom? The Holy Spirit. He made our hearts to be the temple of the Holy Spirit. And he says, I am the Lord, and there is no other. Also, notice that the plants appeared before any seed. That clears up a kind of what I would call chicken and egg question. Which came first, the seed for the plant or the plant? The plants. God created the plants. The plants yielded seed, and so we can just leave it at that. The same is going to be true, though, of also all the animals and fish and birds. There will not be an egg first before any birds appear. There will be birds. Yeah. In these first 3 days, God has separated things from the initial creation. So he separated light from dark. I call this the luminous separation. And then the sea from the sky, that's the vertical sky above, sea below. And now land from sea, which is a horizontal. So if I may, with this thing, so you have first this, I'll call it the luminous separation, the vertical separation, and now the horizontal separation of up from down, left from right, and so forth, and dark from light. Now, in the second part of God's creation, God is going to fill the places that he's created and prepared in the same order that he made the places in the first place. So, under day 1, we're going to have what number day? In my calendar here. What comes next after day 3? Day 4. And it's
under.
So on the way I have this done here with 3 above and 3 below, the one below fills what's missing from the one above in every case. So first he makes light and dark, and it's not until 3 days later that he fills the heavens to make the light bringers. We talked about that a little bit last time. But that's supposed to be a sun, moon, and stars, and a planet. Yeah. I find that with kids, especially, if you draw a planet, it has to be Saturn, or they won't know that it's a planet. It's just a ball otherwise, or a blob. That's actually a terrible circle. That might be the worst circle I've ever drawn. That's more like a triangle, isn't it?
It's spinning, and it's blurry.
Thank you. Yeah, it's got a magical shadow or something on it. All righty. Then under day 2, with sky above and sea below, then you have this kind of a fill-in with the birds flying and the fish swimming. Don't be confused by this because remember that up in the upper right-hand corner, the land was already made. So the birds do have a place to land if they get tired. They don't have to flap for 24 hours before they come down to rest. They already had a place to rest. And the little fish that have to live in the shallows, have a place to live in the shallows because there's land. What kinds of fish must be in the shallow water? I'm thinking of those things that little minnows, octopus have to be in shallow pools. They need to be, and things like, eels and things can be deep, but usually they like to be in the shallows to find things and so forth. And the little fish need to be there. I think those of us who saw Finding Nemo know that clownfish like to live at the drop-off and not further beyond and so forth. They have to have their anemone living there. And then we have with the land created, 3 days later now we have animals created, and then mankind also. I only have one animal there, but Moses counts 5 varieties of animal, and it's consistently used throughout the Bible, especially the books of Moses, but even later on. And I'm going to talk about Linnaeus and the taxonomy that we use today, but really in the Bible, we need to be careful because sometimes I know that I had Sunday school teachers who got upset in the book of Jonah if children would say Jonah was swallowed by a whale. And I think it's perfectly reasonable that Jonah would have been swallowed by a whale. And one of the reasons is because the Hebrew word dog means fish, but however, it really means swimmer. Not necessarily just fish. It means swimming thing. And a whale qualifies as a swimming thing. Because otherwise, when did God make the octopuses?
Day 5.
Well, it really has to be day 5. But if he made only the fish on day 5 and an octopus, which I think is a swimmer, wasn't made on day 5, then when was it made? Yeah, which I think doesn't make any sense. I think they were made on day 5 and so forth. I also think that the whales were made on day 5 and not on day 6. And on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And we'll talk about what I mean by that when we get there. Questions on day 3. Well, I have a big question about it, but we're going to save it for later.
Actually, you mentioned about there are 3 heavens. Could you repeat that for me?
Sure. In a couple places in the Bible, more than one heaven are mentioned. For example, in 2 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul talks about being caught up in what he says is the third heaven. The third heaven is the ultimate high place where God is. That's what you and I would call heaven.
Okay.
But sometimes the Bible will talk about the heavens as being where shooting stars come from and where the sun and moon fly around in. That's also the heavens. Well, that's a separate thing from God's heaven. And it's also a separate thing from where the birds fly. So the birds up in the blue sky are in the first heaven. The stars are in the second heaven. And God himself is in the third heaven. But having said that, we have this question of when were the angels made? And what day of creation did that happen on? Because could it be that that's when God separated the heavens or the sky from the water, for example? Or when he made the heavens and the earth? Those are 2 good arguments for day 1 and day 2. And ancient Christians and Jews advocated for day 1 and day 2. But they also advocated for day 4, when God made the stuff to fill the heavens. And that makes sense to me also. So now we have days 1, 2, and 4 as candidates for the angels. But then he also made the things, the actual living creatures that fly in the sky, the birds, on day 5. So day 5 makes sense to me as an argument for when were the angels made also. But man is the crown of creation, And aren't angels really close to being the crown of creation or the servants of man also? So doesn't that make day 6 a good argument for the day of creation? So ancient Jews and Christians argued, and when I say argued, I mean had big public debates and wrote papers and letters and books about this. Days 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6. And I think they were made on day 3. And I have a reason for thinking that. We're just not there yet. Okay? We're going to talk about that. But, and I'm not going to require that you agree with me about that. Because I think that an argument that states it could be days 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 is a valid argument. The angels could have been made on any of those days. Could it even be that the angels were made on one day, and the archangels on one day, and the seraphim on one day, and the cherubim on one day, and the rulers, powers, and authorities on another day? And they could have been made on each of the days of creation. Well, I kind of think that they were made all the same day of creation, because to us an angel is an angel, but maybe to the angels that's not the case. But just as a man is a man, a woman is a woman, all in the same day of creation. But anyhow, the Bible doesn't tell us when, but there are 1 or 2 hints, and we'll get to them. But I want to do angels separately, okay? So we'll go to day 4. And did you see what Mark, our custodian, put up for me?
Oh, nice.
Ta-da! Isn't that nice?
Yes. Although that one's 5 minutes faster.
Yes.
2:21.
Well, we're going by that one, because that's
Okay.
the one I can see.
Yeah.
So, okay. So day 4. And God said, "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times, days, and years." That's a vitally important verse. Why are the constellations, why is the zodiac where it is, and so forth? And that's it. Serve as signs to mark sacred times, days, and years. And let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth. And it was so.
The universe, and there's a separate light.
Well, notice that in verse 14, the word light is plural. It's lights.
Oh, lights.
Right. So back in verse 3, that's a really good question, Yoko. Back in verse 3, God creates light that is the substance, the thing that makes us able to see, the brightness.
Okay.
Now he creates the objects that cause light to happen. Either they make light themselves because they're on fire, like the sun, or they reflect light, like the moon and like the moon. So the stars make their own light. The sun makes its own light. Comets only reflect light, which is why comets have tails.
You can put planets with the moons. You can
Absolutely,
put it
planets.
out at night and see-
Yeah,
Mhm.
with the light,
Yep.
yeah.
And often are the brightest in the sky because they're closer to the sun. And when you genuinely see a comet, notice that when a comet is approaching on its way, when we first see a comet, my mom and I camped out in our yard back in, I forget what year it was, 75, for a comet called Kohoutek that was on its way. This is before Halley's Comet was on its way. And when Halley's Comet came, most of the world the weather made it overcast. We couldn't see it when it came. Huge disappointment. We'll have to wait 80 more years like Mark Twain. But when Kohoutek came, I remember Mom and I looking out my cheap little dime store telescope and thinking, it looks backwards because the tail was in front.
Oh, really?
Because a comet's tail is always the gas it's releasing, in relation to the sun. So, no, when it's coming, the tail's behind. When it's going, the tail is in front of it. It's going toward, because the gas is coming out the other side, away from the sun. So when it's leaving, it trails its tail. So
Weird.
it is weird, but it's and I remember my mother, God bless my mother, So it's like a little dog running away with its tail between its legs. Mom was not an astronomer, but wow, did she ever pin that one down. I really appreciated that. So,
they're different. One is a symbol.
yep. So yeah, in 14, it's the actual sun, moon, and stars. Whereas back in the first day of creation, it was just light as a medium, as whatever light is. Light in some ways is rays or waves, and in some ways light is particles, and it behaves differently in different ways and different aspects. But I wanted to make it clear earlier that light was created before the stars. So I don't know if God created the stars as if they were old. He certainly created Adam and Eve as if they were mature, and the fish and the birds and so forth, and the trees as if they were mature. And so the same could be true of starlight and things. So we can have, our universe can appear to be ancient without actually being ancient. Just as Adam and Eve were, Eve, when was Eve tempted? What's the saying in America? Well, I wasn't born yesterday. Well, that's because Eve was born yesterday, theoretically, when she fell. That's where that saying comes from. I wasn't born yesterday. Well, she was made, not yesterday, but the day before yesterday, or whatever it was. We'll talk about that in the fall also. Some of those old sayings of ours come right out of the Bible. Our saying, "Were you born in a barn?" Why do we say that? Of a person who leaves a door open because he can miraculously close it? Because who was born in a barn? Jesus, in a stable, so he doesn't have to close the door. He can just, beckon it shut. Were you born in a barn? It's so. I think that anyway. We'll come back to that. All right, verse 16. God made two great lights. This is from the point of view of course, man, his creation. Because our sun is by no means the greatest light, in the universe. What is it? Betelgeuse, I think, is the largest star, or one of the really colossal ones. If I had a marble in this room and set it on the table and that was our sun, Betelgeuse would be the size of the whole room. Wow. It's that much larger. And if it blows up, a lot of us are in trouble. At least on the south side of town. I don't know about the north side of town, but yeah, so so don't panic about
How
that.
many
Though.
years before it gets here?
Oh, yeah.
At least a few. At least a few.
So I have time to say my final prayers.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, we'd probably have a service. Yeah. God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars, so they're actually mentioned. So the terms, by the way, the actual words in Hebrew, sun and moon, don't show up in the text of the Bible until after the flood. Before the flood, it's only called the greater light and the lesser light. But then after the flood, they're called sun and moon. Shemesh is sun, and anyway. The reason why I think that might be important is something we'll get to at the flood story. Because I'm not convinced that our beautiful first day of spring blue sky outside today, I don't think is what they had at creation. I think they had an overcast that was permanent. And I have a couple reasons for thinking that. That also may have helped with their longevity as a barrier to the radiations that the sun puts away. It also was a place for God to store the water that the flood was made of and other things. And then the rainbow seems to be an unusual thing for Adam and Eve. And so there it is. The word rain doesn't occur until the flood story starts. There are all kinds of things that are, just noticing. And this is one of them too. Our words, for the words that they used for the two lights in the sky, bright light, dim light, and in an overcast, what would you, it's brighter, it's dimmer. And kind of makes sense too. When it's overcast, that the sun is out, but you can't always tell what time it is or where the sun is. And with the moon, it's even more difficult, if it's truly overcast. Okay. 17. God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And I'm going to come back to that because Moses just did something poetically that you didn't even notice, but his readers would have noticed. Let me read verse 19 first, and then we'll come back to it. And there was evening and there was morning, the fourth day. So now we can say sun went down, sun came up. Sun up, sun down, fourth day. Before this, the light apparently of the divine light was getting dimmer and brighter. But now the sun actually goes down, the earth is revolving and so forth. Well, the purpose of the heavenly bodies are given twice. In verse 14 and 18, it's to separate light from dark. In verses 14 and 18, also signs of the seasons, and then to give light in verses 15 and 17. You've been listening to Invisible Church, the Bible study podcast from St. Paul's Lutheran Church, New Ulm, Minnesota.